Right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Resources Committee on Thursday, the 11th of September. I'm Councillor John Isaac. I'm the chairman, and I've got Vice Chairman Councillor Julian Jones alongside me. Tonight we have one very significant, momentous even, agenda item to deal with, and I propose that we deal with that towards the end, having dealt with some of the hopefully the other items that we can deal with more rapidly. So we'll be changing the agenda a little with your forbearance. Just a few of the usual notices. If the fire alarm goes off, it's real, so we would need to exit and go to the War Memorial Park. The meeting is being webcast. Please make sure that your phones don't ring during the meeting. You're very well accustomed to the use of microphones in the chamber here. So I think that's all on that topic. Right, item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence and substitutions. Pleased to say there are none that I'm aware of. No. Okay, item 2, declarations of interest. No, okay, good. So we've got the minutes of the meeting that we held on the 22nd of July 2025, and before I move those, could I ask Katie just to run through some of the responses that we got from officers that we raised at that meeting, which I think make sure that we sort of tie up all the loose ends, as it were.
Thank you. So for KPI 1.06, the year-on-year reduction in antisocial behaviour, the RAG status parameters for 24-25 KPIs have been provided. Tom also provided a written update covering the national and local trends, and that highlighted that nationally and locally, police recorded antisocial behaviour has seen reductions in recent years, with considerable reductions, particularly in 22 and 23, and figures for the past 2 years being fairly stable. In terms of the breakdown of the types of antisocial behaviour most prevalent in the area, some areas within Hampshire, including Basingstoke and Deane, experienced a small rise this year. However, figures remain significantly lower than 5 years ago, and for 24-25 it's vehicle nuisance, as Tom suggested on the evening, at 25%, youth-related antisocial behaviour at 24%, and neighbour nuisance at 13%, and details of how the team are working to address this is included in that written response. Moving on to KPI 1.07, which was the no use of bed and breakfast for 16 to 17-year-olds, clarification was sought on whether individuals placed in bed and breakfast were added to the housing list or provided accommodation. It was confirmed in writing that there is no link between temporary bed and breakfast placements during homelessness investigations and positions on the housing register, housing allocations being governed by separate statutory and policy rules. And then finally on KPI 2.17, which was to achieve a net increase in the number of trees planted on council land, the committee sought some clarity on how many of the trees that we plant survive. And Tom confirmed that we track and care for our newly planted trees for a period of 3 years, including watering and health checks. Some trees may fail due to damage or poor conditions, but we only remove them early if they're unsafe or beyond recovery, and replacements may happen later, but that won't always be in the same spot. Having said all that, we have a 94% survival rate of the trees that we plant, which is a really high result for council planting. So that's just a high-level summary of the responses raised at last committee.
Great, thank you very much, Katie. So I think, can I move that we approve the minutes? Is everyone happy with the minutes as written? Good, okay, thank you. Now, as I said earlier, we've got two other items on the agenda, which I think we can deal with before we get to the main subject. Firstly, item 5, there's a motion that was referred from Cabinet, putting an end to empty shops and empowering our local economy. This relates to a council motion and involves the government high street rental auction scheme, which is intended to intervene where there are instances of long-term vacant properties. So what I would suggest here is that if we're happy to take this on, we're encouraged to do so, that we ask the relevant officers to prepare a report so that it can come back to the committee, and I think you've already put it in, haven't you, in the work programme? Right. Okay. Fine. So, does anyone have any comments on that, or are we all happy that that should be the right approach? Tony.
I'm quite happy with that, but what I'd like to see it go through a lot very quick if possible, because at this moment in time, I've been up the top of the town, and all we're going back to the old place like it was before it all fell down. There's places now for drinking, mainly coming up, so I think we ought to hurry along.
Jack, what's a reasonable timetable for this?
We'll need time for officers to prepare the report and get the right information together, but we can look and we'll sort out dates with officers and come back to the committee quickly by email just to confirm a date that we'll add it to the work programme.
Thank you. All right, Tony? No, Hannah.
Thank you. Will the report offer any alternatives? Because I remember from full council not everybody was sold, so they were happy to look at it, but potentially alternatives could be considered. Would that happen?
I think we can ask for that, and we should, and any downsides there are to this, and alternatives. So I think that ought to be covered. I agree. Yes, thank you. So we'll go with that. Fine. And then we've also been invited to deal with a motion from council about enhancing local resilience and emergency preparedness. This is really about the council's current state of readiness for major civil emergencies, including but not limited to national security events. So I think it's clearly, it was raised in council and it's very germane, and I assume that we're happy to take this on. I think we've got the Cabinet Member for Communities, Partnerships and Inclusion needs to sign up to this as well, but I'm assuming he will. Yes, good, okay, thank you. And again, I think it's a case of asking the relevant officers to prepare a report, and then we can discuss it at this committee. Are we agreed in principle to taking this to? Yeah, Tony.
I was always under the understanding, as is here, you can say it's right or wrong, that the Chief Executive used to take this on years ago. I don't know whether he has done now. All this.
Yes, of course.
Eh?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I'm responsible for all emergency management matters, and we have a whole structure in place, both within the council and across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, to deal with any issues. Legally, we're responsible as a statutory one responder. So yes, it's something we're involved in all the time, and including today. So yes, absolutely, it falls within my responsibilities.
Good. All right. So I think again, if we can put that into the work programme, Jack. So that means that we can focus on agenda item 4, which is local government reorganisation, and clearly this is of some real consequence, because what we're being asked to consider here are the final proposals that are due to go to Cabinet and then to Council, so that with the intention that it would then go on the 26th of September to the government, and these are our proposals alongside 11 other councils across Hampshire for a unitary form of local government, which will obviously involve significant change to the way local government is delivered in the borough and across the whole of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. And one has to bear in mind that this would bring to an end a very long period of the borough operating as an organisation covering the Basingstoke area only. Basingstoke is an ancient borough that was incorporated in 1392, and it was created a municipal borough in 1836, and the modern borough council was established in 1974. So what is being considered here tonight is a very major change, historic change in the way that local government is organised in the borough, and that will have big impact for our residents and indeed the staff of this council. I think we are the first scrutiny committee out of the 12 councils to be looking at the final proposals that will be going to Cabinet next week. There's obviously a huge amount of information and analysis that we've had to do, that we've had to absorb here, over something in the order of 600 pages. And I suppose at this point I would like to congratulate the officers, the Chief Executive and the Deputy Chief Executive, and the senior councillors who've been involved in putting together this immense piece of work over a very short period of time, 8 months, I think, thereabouts. So what we as a committee have to do tonight, our objectives are to consider the report to Cabinet and Council, and we're asked to make any recommendations to Cabinet relating to the Council's preparation for local government reorganisation and or the implementation of the full proposal, should it be approved by government. Of course, it's likely that we can expect an alternative proposal to be coming from Hampshire County Council and from East Hampshire Council, but I don't think that's been published yet. So, given how much information there is there, what I'm proposing to committee is that we focus on the full proposal, Appendix 4, and there are 8 chapters in that, 8 sections, and that we take them section by section. There is one on the Isle of Wight, and now we may decide that we haven't anything useful to say about the Isle of Wight, but I don't want to prevent anyone who may wish to say something about the Isle of Wight. So, thank you, Dave. But I've asked the Chief Executive and the Deputy Chief Executive to make some introductory comments to each section to help us focus the questions and the ongoing debate. So just one other comment I make is, of course, that having got to this point, all the political parties in Basingstoke and Deane have to date supported the proposals for a North Hampshire unitary, which is at the core of the proposals that affect Basingstoke and Deane. I think I can probably now turn to the portfolio holder who's responsible for taking this forward, the leader of the council, Councillor Paul Harvey, to invite him to make some introductory opening remarks to us. If I can hand over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate that. And to pick up where you just left off, a thank you to the group leaders and to all members who have been thus far involved in the various bits of this process that's been ongoing for, as you say, nearly 8 months now. The collegiate and cross-group approach that we've taken has been really, really impressive and has got us this far, and stands in reflection, I think, to the way necessarily others with other proposals have approached this, but we'll come on to that. In terms of colleagues, you'll remember that we began the process last December when the government announced its white paper on devolution for the creation of regional mayors, and then the process for local government reorganisation was announced at the same time. We weren't expecting that, but the government made its position abundantly clear. The two-tier system of councils in the UK needed replacing with new unitary authorities. Hampshire County Council in January applied to postpone their elections this year, and the government agreed. So alongside that application, they approved Hampshire on the fast track for devolution. Now, what that meant was that our timetable for change was based around the mayor being created and elected in May 2026, new councils being created and elected in 2027 as shadow authorities, and then vesting coming into being in 2028. We began that process by working with 15 other councils across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. We agreed some principles in March, and you'll remember that that was the last debate that we had at full council. And then that led to an appraisal and an analysis creating the options for consideration. We narrowed down the options, working together as 15 authorities based on data and evidence. And then Hampshire County Council and East Hampshire made the choice to walk away from the rest of us because they didn't like the answers. They pursued their own proposal and have continued to do so, and Gosport have also chosen to opt out of the process because they don't agree with LGR, full stop. Meanwhile, the remaining 12 councils, the 9 districts, 2 cities in the island, have all been working together to produce the near 600-page analysis and proposal that you see tonight. On one level, this is a process to meet the government's criteria, and that's a vital guiding direction for the document being written and designed as it is. But running more fundamental to that, alongside that, is the vision that we have for our future. And I think it's very important that we need to be masters of our own destiny, and that has guided our thinking. For us, we believe that North Hampshire is the right option, and that means working with our neighbours in Hart and Rushmore and coming together as equals in that process, close enough to residents to maintain our local connection, while being large enough to sustain all the services under one roof. So imagine that for a moment. Imagine what we could do for children's services or social care with a North Hampshire approach that builds on our solid reputation for partnership working and collaboration. Think of what that would mean for children with SEND, or to older residents as we build a social care service intricately linked to health, a health-led service. Think about putting the child at the centre of a service based on the United Nations rights of the child. Consider the infrastructure debate we could have when highways, planning, housing and community services, amongst many, are actually all under one roof. Our economy in North Hampshire generates the best part of 19 billion in GVA a year. That means we are one of the most important pieces of the economic puzzle in the South East. Our productivity and inward investment profile in the last couple of years stands out, because from Farnborough to Basingstoke, both rural and urban, we look up the M3, not down the M3, and our success stands alone from Hampshire. Our friends in the Solent are critical to this overall equation, and the councils you will see, based on the documents in front of you, are based on the key economic centres here in North Hampshire, Winchester, Southampton and Portsmouth. That really defines our understanding of place, our respect for connection, but also, and really importantly, our approach to transformation. More of the same from the County Council does nothing to improve the lives of our residents. Their services are currently subject to cuts, to services being lost in the maelstrom of the county's dire financial position. We have no youth service to speak of. Our libraries, our bus services, our daycare centres have all been hit by cuts. Evicting the CAB from the Discovery Centre is just one example of how Hampshire simply doesn't get it. It's all about them. And they forget that this process means that we will all cease to exist. We will all cease to exist as councils. And what comes after us will be new. So I don't think they quite have come to terms with that. The new councils that are being created are our way of charting this new future for our area, for our residents. And I think we have a very clear vision, and one that many of you share and we have debated in other fora. And it's important of how we embrace the change, but acknowledge also and manage the risks that are associated with that. And that's a very important point. That we build that future based on the excellent local government family we have, working for all three of the district councils, but also those working for the county council. It's about unlocking that talent and building a learning council that wants to innovate in the way forward. So that is incredibly important from a local government perspective, but it is also linked to our incredibly strong partnerships. So our partnerships in health, in education, in business, and the voluntary sector, all of whom locally have been incredibly supportive of the proposal that we are putting forward. And that also includes our partners in the parish and town councils, who have been a very important part of this conversation. It also is for our residents, who have taken part in our surveys and taken part in the work that we've done to date in engagement. And in North Hampshire alone, that gives us a return of over 10-1 in favour of the North Hampshire proposal. So this debate this evening that you're to have is really the key next step on our journey, and I really do look forward to hearing your views about this very complex and very important, and as you rightly say, John, very profound decision that we'll be making.
Thank you very much, Paul. Now, we don't have any visiting speakers, but we have had a letter from a former councillor and a former leader of the council, Clive Sanders. He was the leader of the council from 2012 to 2019, and he was always very interested in the future of the borough and looking to see how we could map out a better future for the residents of Basingstoke. So if I have circulated the letter, but for the benefit of those listening in, if I may read it and then invite you, Paul, to respond, because you are named in it. It's almost, it's almost complimentary, but we'll see. So this is from ex-councillor Clive Sanders. Dear John, my apologies for being unable to attend your meeting, but would ask that if possible you circulate my views to the committee for discussion. I've received the paper on reorganisation of local government with great interest. In general, I'm very supportive in the attempts to tackle the issue of achieving critical mass to maintain financial security while maintaining local involvement and buy-in from the electorate. I find myself in the strange situation of, for once, agreeing with Councillor Harvey in his analysis of the need for local involvement. I agree that biggest is not necessarily best, but I'm concerned that the proposed North Hampshire Authority is borderline in terms of size to give an adequate financial safety net and meet the future challenges of an ageing community. In that context, I question the sense in reorganising simply along existing council boundaries established 50 years ago, when life was very different. It seems a rather too simplistic solution to dealing with a more complex issue. To define local involvement, should we not be looking at how communities have changed and grown up, which did not exist in 1975? Specifically, I would question why Andover is not part of North Hampshire. The travel from Basingstoke to Andover is less than that from Basingstoke to Farnborough. The hospital trust runs hospitals in both places. Policing is closely aligned. There is a direct spine route up the A303 M3 to link the communities together, the integration of Andover could be accommodated without unduly disrupting our other proposals for new councils further south. There is a rural countryside naturally dividing North Hampshire, including Andover, from Winchester, East Hants and the southern part of Test Valley. Before rushing to form North Hampshire Council, is there not a case for a boundary review to examine economic and social integration in the proposed area to ensure that it truly reflects localism and does not perpetuate anomalies left over from a time gone by? I appreciate that there are sensitivities, but this is too important to be ignored or put in the too difficult drawer. I'm not proposing a wholesale redrawing of boundaries, but a limited expansion to reflect the way we live now and increase the opportunities for better coordinated local government and economic growth. It would be good to see a side-by-side comparison of the financial viability of the current proposals with a proposal for a limited expansion of the new area reflecting the way we live today, not in the last century. So this needs to be based upon an analysis of the profile of council tax income, not just population numbers, and incorporate how capital and debt will be accommodated. It might answer my concerns about financial security, but still keep all residents within a local framework and involved. We're almost there, but the whole proposal needs some kind of external sense check to make sure we're not just taking the easy way out and accepting conventions, but providing a fertile base for future growth. So, Paul, could I invite you to respond to that?
I'm more than happy to, and can I thank Clive for sharing his views with us. We often used to fall out in the council chamber and spent many years across both sides. I think, to be fair, it's really nice to hear the endorsement for the work that's been going on, and I welcome it. The localism point, I think, is very well made, actually, because that's a fundamental part of what we want to do as the 12 of us together, in contrast to the county council. The idea of trying to continue an authority that would be stretching from Petersfield and Horndean to Farnborough, or from Test Valley and Andover to Southampton, is something that is not, in many of our colleagues' views, real. It doesn't reflect the connection to community, and that's been a key part of the driver. So I hear what Clive says, but there are also some very important considerations that we need to take into account. Portsmouth is a very successful unitary authority. It's one that runs its budget well, it delivers its services successfully, and it does so with a population of 250,000. That's one of the best councils in the country in the context of the criteria that we're looking at that population scale. Small doesn't mean that you are unsuccessful either. And at 400,000, I think it's worth pointing out that our authority that we propose is balanced amongst the four. So the population ranges between 400,000 and 600,000 amongst the four, with purpose, because those four are then balanced across the mainland of the county. And in the context of sharing and responsibility through a mayoral authority, those voices then become equal inside that mayoral combined authority to an extent, and that's really important. And they would still be, at 400,000, one of the largest unitary authorities created in the country thus far. So these are not small authorities in any stretch of the imagination. And if you think about the geography we're covering, you're talking about a significant geography still. So I respect the argument that Clive makes. I would also say that we need to respect our neighbours. And in the sense of Test Valley and how they feel about this, and their expression of what they want thus far, they have been very clear about not being broken up as an authority. So it isn't just about us, it's about all of our neighbours and how they want to approach this process and respecting each other. And the way the three of us have come together, Hart, Rushmore and Basingstoke and Dean, has been incredibly constructive, and then with the others equally so, to get to the stage we're at. There are some technical points that I would ask the Chief Executive just to respond to in terms of what Clive has said that are worth drawing out, if you don't mind, Chair.
Yes, thank you. And Chief Executive, please.
Thank you, Chair. So just picking up some of the specific points. So in terms of the financial case, that's very clear that the four new unitaries are very financially viable. Each one of them is very financially viable, and each one of them starts from a strong financial position, whether it be income streams, reserve levels, etc. North Hampshire particularly so. In terms of size, as the leader of the council's alluded to, this is a massive unitary we're talking about, of 400,000. It would be, out of over 115 unitaries at the moment, it would be the 16th biggest. So to suggest 407 is somehow a small unitary is only because the government originally referenced a figure of 500,000, which they have now changed from and made clear was just a guide. It's not a target figure. It was just a figure they put in as a guide, and they're happy with both above and below. In terms of the Andover point, it's not something anyone's shown any support through the whole process. However, just from a technical point of view, I think it's important to set out, once those new unitaries are established, they can request a boundary review at any point. You can't do a boundary review until the new authorities are established, because there is no boundary to review. The only way to put forward a proposal that isn't based on district building blocks is to request a modification to a proposal from the government, which they then use the legislation to create, which is part of one of the variations around Southampton and Portsmouth. But the boundary review can only be done post the implementation of the unitaries. So assuming the government approves that proposal, that North Hampshire unitary and whoever controls it after an election could well request a boundary committee review of its boundary, as any new unitary could. And what will definitely happen is the boundary committee will come in anyway to review the electoral arrangements and design the wards. So I just thought it was important to highlight those 3 points.
Thank you. It's very useful. Appreciate that. Right. I think we can now go on to look at the full proposal, which is entitled "Close Enough to Be Local, Big Enough to Stay Strong." And as I said, there are, I think, eight chapters, and there are other appendices that go with it. I think another 8 appendices. I'm not proposing that we consider any of those. They're sort of supportive to the main body of work. But if anyone wishes to delve into any of the appendices, then please let me know. If I could invite our Chief Executive Russell O'Keefe to introduce section 1, which is our approach to assessing the options and developing this proposal. So we will just sort of a brief intro. Russell would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So section 1 sets out the process that's been gone through to get to this full proposal to government. So it sets out, after the white paper was published, how we initially worked together as the 15 existing councils in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight to assess the options for new unitary councils to replace the existing structure of local government against the government criteria, and then post-March that also included assessment against those locally agreed principles that were approved by all 15 councils, cabinet and councils in March. The 15 councils started with 12 options for new unitary councils, which were then shortlisted down to 8, which were put through a very detailed data-led process using 44 metrics aligned with the government criteria. And that detailed assessment used a huge amount of community service and financial data from the 15 councils to do that assessment, and it assessed options for between 2 and 5 unitary councils to replace the existing structure of local government. The outcome of that assessment was that 4 new unitaries on the mainland was assessed as working best against the government criteria and those locally agreed guiding principles, with the Isle of Wight remaining separate as an independent Ireland Unitary Authority, as the leader of the council alluded to in his introduction. At that point, 3 councils left the process for differing reasons. The remaining 12 councils, so the 3 existing unitaries and the 9 districts and borough, obviously including ourselves, then worked up into this full proposal's 3 variations of those 4 new mainland unitaries, which are shown on page 19. All 3 of those variations include a North Hampshire unitary, as has already been described. So it's the same in all 3. Similarly, same in all 3 is that they're based around the 4 anchors of the major population centres and urban economies of Basingstoke, Southampton, Portsmouth and Winchester and their surrounding areas. 2 of those variations are based on using districts as building blocks. The 3rd requests government to change boundaries, as I touched on earlier. Really, the main difference between the 3 variations is the future, or where the existing area of New Forest would be served in those new unitaries. It also then sets out the process for developing the full programme, all the engagement the 12 councils have done, including with partners, local MPs, businesses, residents. It sets out the service design process that has been undertaken, the approach to democratic design, and summarises how the financial case was built, which is section 7.
Right, thank you for that. So, members, any questions about the approach to assessing the options? Councillor Jones.
I think we've had enough briefings on part of this already, and I think it really boils down to we haven't got a choice in reality, and what the Chief Executive's pointed out to us, this is the best option. And I think unless someone comes up with some terrific plan or something, you know, Basingstoke on its own, which I doubt would be big enough. So it's a shame we have to go down this road. Like, you know, you losing Basingstoke with Rushmore and the rest of them, but that's life, I'm afraid. We have to go with it.
Well, I suppose it might be helpful to understand why this is being done, because it's been instigated by the government, and many people in Basingstoke would think that this council operates very well, and it's financially solvent. There's good levels of representation by councillors, and so sort of, if it ain't broke, why fix it? Could be a question. So, sort of, given that we are here tonight, this is a public forum, and therefore we're here to think in terms of how this impacts upon our residents. Be perhaps useful, Paul, if you'd like to respond to that particular question.
Thank you. It's interesting, isn't it? Because the Labour manifesto for the general election included a commitment to devolution. It was very clear there was a manifesto commitment for that. So they were elected on the platform to deliver what they considered to be the regional mayors. LGR, local government reorganisation, was not part of that agenda, but they have themselves made it very clear that the two, in their mind, go in tandem. And in processing the white paper before Christmas, they made it clear that there were processes you could go through. So, for example, Surrey is going through a process where it will do local government reorganisation first before they come up with a mayor. Hampshire chose in the devolution debate to go first. They wanted to be a priority area for devolution, and that was agreed across all of the 15 authorities on the basis that that's where the unitaries were going, and that was the best option with what was presented to us. I think you're right. The question is, you know, where does this come from? It comes from the government's very clear position that they want to do away with the two-tier system, and they think there is efficiency. They believe there is betterment by having one single authority over a geographic area. And so that's why all of the 2T areas in the country are part of this process at different points in the timetable, mind you, but that is their intention. And they made that very clear. So this is not a choice. We have no ability to turn around to the government and say we don't want to do this. If we do, it will be done to us. So we have to be masters of our own destiny. So there's a choice. Do we accept the county council's argument that big is best, and that there is an argument that they desire to retain and a sense of what the county council is as the primary motivation, in my opinion? Or do you say we're all going to be abolished? It was interesting putting 15 leaders in a room and saying, discuss the abolition of your authorities, because that's the reality of what's been happening across the country. Everyone's been talking about their authority being done away with and these new councils being created. So I think there is a really important debate to be had about what that structure was. If you think of the natural geography of North Hampshire and the relevance of Rushmore being isolated in that context is important, and the fact that they need to go with their neighbours in heart, and heart come with us, and the relationships we have, there was a natural answer to that question, given the choice we had in front of us. And thus far, in all of the debate we've had since Christmas, no one's really challenged that. No one's really sat back and thought, given the choice we have to make, would we do something different than North Hampshire? And I think while we may not want to start here, and you're right, we are an incredibly successful borough. We deliver excellent services and have done for many years, and we are a very well-run, well-financed and well-managed authority. And thank you for the officer team, because the amount of time they've spent delivering this has also not involved them taking the eye off the ball of what they've been delivering for our residents. And I think that's a really important point to make. This has taken an ocean of time to deliver, but they have continued to put Basingstoke and Dean as one of the most successful authorities in the country, is an important point to make. But we're a borough, we're not a unitary. And given the government's criteria, we don't have the population size to become a unitary, given the criteria they have established. Even if you took the 500,000 as a guide, and you took the 350,000, the 250,000 they've spoken about in different fora, we still don't have that population in Basingstoke and Dean alone. Despite Horizon 2050, despite all the documents that have ever been produced about where projections are for the future of our population. So we have to look to Hart and we have to look to Rushmore in order to establish an offer, a choice, that will match the government criteria. And that's what's driven this, amongst working with our colleagues, the other 12 authorities across Hampshire, because we have to produce a proposal that solves everybody's problem. It can't just be for North Hampshire. We have to have a solution on the table that resolves the whole of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. And that's what we're trying to do. That's our reflection.
Thank you for that. Right, committee, any questions? Councillor Carr.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the portfolio holder and the officers. I think when we first heard from the government back in the December of last year that this would be coming forward, I think there was some surprise. There's some surprise because, of course, this wasn't in the Labour Party's manifesto, as has been mentioned. But unusually, and I think it's probably the only thing the Labour government have done thus far that I agree with this, the principle of local government reorganisation. I agree with the principle of ending the two-tier model of local government in England, because I think as a relatively new councillor, having been elected in 2021, I suppose my reflection would be one of the core reasons for the problems we have are the series of artificial barriers that are the result of splitting, higher tier life and limb services like social care and children's services to one council, and then much more local services to the boroughs. And we have created, as a result of that system, a series of artificial divisions. I'm thinking, for example, around planning. We were having a debate just last week about our local plan, and so many of the conversations focused on infrastructure. We have no control over infrastructure because highways is a responsibility of the county council. We have no responsibility over waste and materials management. Again, we can't truly plan for our area, which is the job that our residents expect of us, because that artificial division exists. Residents expect us to have a view and have an influence over where new schools are delivered, to ensure that local developments we need to bring forwards are properly catered for, but we can't do that because of this artificial division. So the question for me is not whether local government reorganisation needs to take place, but whether we have the right boundaries for that. Because I think, as has been mentioned, having those services under one roof is vital. And I think if I think of some of our really major strategic developments and some of the reasons for those delays, I see the county council as a reason for many of those delays. I think, if I'm thinking about Many Down, I think the county council was not very helpful in that at all. So in terms of the process, which is the fundamental point of Section 1, very happy with the process that we've gone through. I think it's remarkable that we've had the kind of consensus, cross-party consensus, that we have had. I don't think necessarily the county council has behaved in the most gentlemanly way and has not necessarily honoured its word throughout the whole process. But I think it is remarkable, and I think if you were to take a lot of us back to December, it's surprising that the consensus is held, and it is a good thing that it is held. The fundamentals around this of basing the new authorities around centres of main economic centres is very sensible. Southampton, Portsmouth, Winchester, Basingstoke, that is sensible. That is optimal. And the question is then, exactly how large those are. I mean, representing where I do, a lot of my villages in the Bourne Valley, they look to Andover. They think of themselves as North Hampshire villages, and they think of Andover as a North Hampshire town. I do. It is. And, if I were running this process, it would be optimal to start with a blank sheet of paper and work out where the lines ought to go. But we can't do that. We have to use those district building blocks. So yes, I'm very open, after all of this vesting has taken place, to a conversation about whether people feel they're on the right side of those new lines. If people in Andover want to have a conversation about joining North Hampshire after vesting has taken place, I'm very open to that. I think that would be a good thing. But as has been mentioned, that is absolutely something that has to take place after this process.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Golding.
I'm quite confused, I'll be honest, as to why we can look at splitting up the southern bit of Hampshire by kind of district ward boundaries and add them on, but we haven't done that with the north, and it doesn't look like we've kind of tried to do that with the north, because looking at the figures, North Hampshire is the smallest of whatever's going to be created in our three preferred models, and it would feel more balanced if we took on Andover, or indeed where I work, Alton.
Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. So, in the government guidance that they put out, they were very clear that they expected proposals to be based on district boundaries. The legislation actually only allows that, so you can only at the moment create a unitary by taking existing district council areas and merging them together, basically, so you can't take half of one. The only way to do that legally at the moment is to request a boundary review, which you would do after a new authority is created. But what they also said in the guidance is we will consider boundary changes and creating the legislation for that where there are exceptional circumstances, where you've got a really, really strong case. Now, for the southwest, particularly unitary, which is the unitary with Southampton as the anchor, they believe those boundary changes do meet that test, if you like, for exceptional circumstances because of the economy around the city, and that's particularly around the area of the waterside, which is currently in New Forest. Through the process, we've never had anything come back from anyone to suggest there are exceptional circumstances that would convince the government to create a legislative way to include any other areas in North Hampshire. In fact, I can only remember possibly once anyone ever mentioning Andover, if I'm honest, in 8 months of discussions, and that was right at the start. But as I said earlier, those sort of changes would normally to be done through a boundary review. So if the North Hampshire unitary is created, and the administration who controls that starts to hear from those residents that they think they look more to that unitary rather than the Mid Hampshire unitary, they can request that boundary review option is open, you know, for as long as that legislation is in place.
Councillor Harley.
Can I just add to that and say, I do respect what's being said, but an element of this is also respecting our partners in this. And Tess Valley have made it very, very clear, as have New Forest, that they have a very strong opinion about the integrity of their boroughs. That's a part of this process of respecting others in achieving consensus. I think you know, Sam and I, Councillor Carr and I, are aligned on this. The idea that the 12 of us have come together to achieve this level of consensus in a document of over 600 pages stands in very stark contrast to the County Council's proposal and the nature of their proposal and the way they've gone about them. In the sense of government paying attention to attention to their criteria, this is critical. And in the very first instance, to win that argument requires this document to meet the government's criteria in order that they propose to consult on our proposals. Now that's the next step. Beyond that, the Minister will then make a decision. And I think we have to bear in mind that whatever the County Council chooses will also potentially be one of the options that the government chooses to consult on. And therefore, we will have a process of competition between what we propose as the 12 and what they propose with East Hampshire. And I am determined, and I'm sure you are too, that we will win that process for our residents. Because I think North Hampshire is the right option, given the position we're in, and we may not have started there.
Okay, anyone else?
Yes, I guess the Chief Executive, well, I'm not sure who will handle it. In terms of the response from the government, our schedule for submitting this is very clear. Given the change of minister, are we confident that they will be able to come back and give us sufficient time to do all we have to do once they've made a decision?
So the time at the moment, the timetable hasn't changed. So we still are required to submit by the 26th of September. And what we're still expecting, we've had nothing different from the new minister, is that consultation will then take place from November over the winter period. And we're still expecting, as of now, to receive feedback in March. Now, if we hear any different in terms of the change of minister, then the timetable may change, but there's been no change to what the expected timetable is to date.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I was just one, Councillor Harvey.
Just very quickly, all eyes will be on Surrey in the next couple of weeks because they go first. So if the timetable keeps with Surrey's timetable, the rest of it should fall into place.
Now, I've just realised that actually there are 2 empty seats here, and that's Councillor Connor and Councillor Hussey. Now, I don't think we got any apologies, did we? No. Okay. Well, just for the record, could we just make sure that that's recorded? I've got a question, if I may. This has obviously been a process that's been determined by government, and they've set incredibly tight timetables for this. 8 months to get this all done, and you look at the history of local government reorganisation. It's generally something that sort of takes place over years. Now, this might be a good thing or a bad thing, but I suppose it does raise the question, which I think we need to ask on behalf of our residents, is particularly when you're thinking that we're going to be potentially disrupting some very key services that are provided, like adult social care, education, and so forth. Has this process been unnecessarily rushed? are we going to find that that some major things have been overlooked?
Obviously we can only comment about the local government reorganisations we've seen in the time we've been in the sector. Certainly since we've been in the sector, this actually is the slowest process I've ever seen by some distance. So what's happened previously is that a minister, so the way the legislation works is the minister invites proposals for unitary councils from an area, usually a county area. In other reorganisation processes, certainly over the last 10, 15 years, they've been really quick time, like literally got 4 weeks to do the whole thing, 6 weeks to do the whole thing. So 8 months may seem really short, but it's actually, in recent years, quite a long timetable. And then the implementation period in previous reorganisations we've seen has been a lot shorter than this. So, as you know, the government will make, if the timetable's correct, the government will make a decision, February, March time. Those new unitaries won't then launch for another over 2 years, so until 1st of April 2028. In previous reorganisations, that timetable's often been as short as 12 months. So certainly in the recent 10 or 15 years, this isn't a particularly fast timescale. The reorganisations that happened when the legislation that was created in 2007 were on a more similar timescale to this, but still faster. Going back before that, I have to say, I was still at school when the Banham Committee did all the reorganisations, and I don't know, and so was Rebecca, so I don't know.
I think we get the point, Russell, actually. So if I can stop you there. Okay, thank you. Right, so are we, any comments on this particular section? Are we generally happy, given the rules were set by the government, that the process has gone well, and we're pleased that there's been this level of agreement amongst 12 councils? Mark?
That's okay. So reading through the first part of the document, I didn't notice much about how the new authorities will work with the mayor's office that's being formed. How much do we know about that, and how much was the government's approach to the new mayor and unitaries put to the test in the document?
So it's one of the government criteria, so it's set out in the case in, I'll have to find the page, sorry. It's certainly in section 4. I think it's so just while we're finding the page, because it is such a big document, so that is something we tested, and one of the reasons why we think this is absolutely the right solution of the potential options is because it creates a balanced mayoral authority. So each of the unitaries will be constituent members on that mayoral authority, so they'll each have a seat at the table. Evidence from elsewhere suggests that where you have essentially equally balanced partners, or as balanced as you can get sat around the table with the mayor, so they've got a broadly equal voice with that mayor, that works well. What we wanted to avoid was a situation where you had one really big partner with a huge voice, and then say 2 or 3 much smaller partners with much less of a voice with the mayor. So it's those sort of things that are tested in the document, which is on page, can't see the page now, on page 130 in the document. I don't know if you want to add anything to
Okay, thank you. Right, June? Yep, all right. So can we move on to section 2, which is our vision for 4 new mainland unitary councils in the Isle of Wight? Russell?
Certainly, thank you, Chair. So this is one of the short sections of the document, which is only 3 pages, which sets out the sort of overarching vision that was agreed between the 12 councils, a set of principles, and then some sort of key themes that have guided the proposal. In terms of the key themes, I've really talked about 2 of those, which one is around using those population centres and major urban areas as the anchors, the collaborative and inclusive approach with the 12 councils working together, informed by a whole range of work with businesses and partners and local stakeholders. But then also that what we've aimed to do is create both something that works for each individual unitary, so they're each viable and strong from day one, average population size of 500,000, but also they're balanced, so they all have a strong starting point, so the whole system for the area would work. And I suppose the other thing that's implicit in that theme, which is important, is they're based on genuine transformation. So we're not trying to create or expand existing authorities. It's not about takeovers. It's not about recreating existing unitaries or county councils multiple times. It's about creating brand new unitary authorities connected to their communities that can tailor services.
Thank you. Right, committee members, any questions in relation to that particular section? Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 key points. The first just follows up on the comment about the strategic authority. In terms of timescales, it occurs to me that the strategic authority comes into being in May 26, and then the new authorities don't vest, the unitary authorities don't vest until April 28. So you've got quite a considerable period of time there where the strategic authority is a combined county authority, not a combined authority. And so for those first 2 years, is it my understanding that the existing boroughs and districts of which we are one are non-constituent members, and therefore we have no voice, potentially, in what that strategic authority does with its first 2 years in office? And the reason I mention this is, of course, one of the things the government is very keen for the mayor to do is strategic planning, so that strategic development scheme. So I think one of the things we need to start thinking about quite quickly is how we influence the mayor's decisions, particularly because that strategic development scheme is going to have a very, very sizable role in what our next set of local plans look like. How are we holding that mayor to account, I think, is the summary of that question. And then the substantive point relating to section 2 of this report is broadly to very much welcome what's put here, particularly that aspiration for all these new unitaries to be much more sort of customer focused, agile, responsive to residents' concerns. I think broadly speaking, if I were to draw a contrast, what this borough council does is sort of listen to folk and make a big effort to engage with residents and communities. And I don't really ever see that from the county council, bless them. So what I would say is we must, as we transition over, not pick up any bad habits and stick to that, engagement approach, residents focused approach. But also to recognise that, local government reorganisation isn't going to be a panacea. We'll come on to this when we get to the financial modelling, but it's important not to start with a narrative that local government reorganisation, while it will improve matters, will change everything. You do still have a very strong central government intervention in local affairs. We've seen that on the planning side. And as the Basingstoke and Deane moves into North Hampshire, you'll see that significant government intervention into services in social care and children's social care. The extent to which we will be able to make local decisions on those services will be significantly curtailed by a lot of dense legislation around social care, children's social care. And we know that the broader fiscal situation for local government in England isn't necessarily good. And moving around the boundaries of local government, while it's going to improve what we can deliver here, is not fundamentally going to change the financial position. I think those would be my broad observations at this point.
No, I mean, again, concur in many ways. I think the culture of the authority on day one and the movement, because if you think about the shadow authority, it's going to come in with a year before vesting. So the appointment of chief executive, the appointment of deputy chief executive, the appointment of a senior leadership team, the culture that is set in that new authority is really important. And so if you take our three organisations, by bringing them together over the next couple of years in a way where the districts can work already together before we bring on our county colleagues, in a way that they become fundamentally part of the organisation is part of this. It's also worth saying that they alone will be the largest part of that workforce joining, if you think about the context in which that is set. So it's really important that those four organisations come together in a way that the culture of that new authority is established really successfully. So the confidence point, I think, becomes really important, that the leadership of that authority, whoever it is, gives the confidence to, for example, the business community, or gives confidence to the voluntary sector, that they are, as best as able, hitting the ground running, and that that work is done amongst us all. I think it's also worth saying about the combined authority, and this is fair of both the previous government and the current government. The district councils network have a very particular view on this, that district authorities have not had a seat at the combined authority table thus far in this debate, and where amendments have been moved on the floor of the House or in the Lords, they have been voted down by consecutive governments. So I think the district voice within the mayoral combined authorities is a big missing piece of the puzzle. There are other combined mayoral authorities that have taken the view of allowing either representation or allowing all districts to sit at the table. While we go through those 2 years, we obviously have Hampshire County Council, the two cities in the Isle of Wight as the upper tier authorities involved. And it is interesting, and does this not work out to the numbers, the government have decided there will be 5 seats sat round our combined authority table. And if you think about our proposal of 4 mainland unitaries and 1 island, it fits the future. You're right, those 2 years are going to be pretty critical, actually. So our voice, in a sense, that also makes our voice strong. So what we do together against whatever the mayor may be deciding is pretty important, actually. We need some strong views, I think.
So it occurs to me that as a committee we could make as one of our recommendations that we would like to see the boroughs and districts have more of a seat at the table in the ongoing process, and I think that's probably we all agree with that. Good. Okay. I've got just a question, because one of the big changes that's going to be that we residents will notice, I think, is the arrival of an elected mayor. And this is about devolution, I know, not local government reorganisation, but the two are sort of completely wrapped up together. And the powers and the funding that's going to be given to the mayor is not very clearly sketched out by the government. Would Russell, based on the experience you've had, would you like to sort of give us some flavour of how things might go forward, what the relationship between the new unitaries and an elected mayor are going to be in the future?
So in terms of what that might look like, we have talked before in terms of examples that are currently in existence. So the Greater London Authority and the Mayor of London is a really good example, and the relationship with the district and boroughs. So the Strategic Authority is a policy setting authority. They don't deliver services. They set out the strategic policy for the region, and they might have control of things like the strategic transport agenda, strategic planning has already been referenced earlier, housing numbers potentially. So there's a number of policy areas they might have control of. And then, of course, much like we would with central government policy at the moment, the unitaries that would sit underneath would then work to some of that agenda. The difference is, of course, with the mayors and the strategic authorities that are currently being set up is they are being built from scratch. And if you think of an example of the GLA, they are a number of years into their setup and are very well established now in terms of their role and growth. Whereas the mayors that are currently being proposed across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight and other regions are still in the process. So the upper tier authorities are leading that process to set up the strategic authority. They will set out what they think policies might look like, but ultimately it will be for the whoever is elected in as the mayor to actually set that agenda when they arrive. And so there will be some time before we really understand how that mayor might want to operate, what sort of agenda they might want to operate on, and how the unitaries might work with them. And there will be a transition year, as Councillor Carr has already indicated, where actually the new unitaries aren't set up and the district and boroughs and the existing upper tier authorities are in place. So that will be a period of transition. So it is very high level at the moment. We are starting to see how that might emerge, but we do need to stay quite nimble in terms of how we interact with the emerging strategic authority, both as a borough at the moment, but also how the new unitary might work. And that's something we'll need to keep moving forward.
Yeah, just one thing on that. What's the evidence? What does the evidence point to in terms of how government might seek to channel large chunks of funding to the mayor? Is that something we might expect?
So I think it depends, to be honest. Certainly the indication has been that for new strategic authorities, that funding will be more limited. The same as the level of powers and responsibilities given to those mayors will be more limited. Once they're, I can't remember the term in the government guidance, but once they're a more established strategic authority, then there's potential for greater funding and powers and responsibilities. So the ones Rebecca referred to, which are the famous examples, obviously London and Greater Manchester, have been around for some years and do have quite significant funding streams, obviously, and powers and responsibilities which are way beyond what these mayors will certainly start with. Obviously, it also depends on the overall economic situation of the country in terms of how much money is available.
Probably best not go there. Right, Councillor Harvey.
Just very quickly, I just think, and this is a political point, but I guess sitting from an independent perspective, it's interesting to watch the fact that to take part in the mayoral election, you've got to put down a £10,000 deposit. That is very anti-democratic in so many ways. I think there are better ways that we could think about how the mayoral process is taken forward. But just that point just stands out like a sore thumb to actually engage in this and it's not about a personality contest. These people are going to, should, I hope, be putting forward significant policy platforms for us to scrutinise and understand what they will do when they take on that role. But just the simple passage of having to find £10,000 to take part in an election in this country is quite something that's disgraceful, really, in many ways.
Julian. Jonathan, even.
Just to correct you, it's 5,000 for the deposit and then 5,000 for the brochure.
Thank you for that. Councillor Watts.
Thank you. Just to get this right in my head. So we have mayoral elections next year. They're going to be accountable to the county that is going to be abolished in the following year. So I still don't understand how we get into that process of accountability to the mayor.
So the mayor won't be accountable to the county. the mayor has full executive powers themselves. They are, as I touched on earlier, for a limited number of areas. And as Rebecca talked about, they're really policy-making areas rather than service delivery areas. Beneath them, they have representatives of each of the upper tiers until the unitaries are created. So the 5 seats will be made up of 2 seats from Hampshire County Council and 1 seat from the Isle of Wight, 1 seat from Portsmouth and 1 seat from Southampton. And that comes back to my point earlier. That's exactly what we've tried to make sure we don't end up with moving forward, which is one council having more seats and therefore more of a say with the mayor. So under what we're proposing, there would be 1 seat per unitary, if that makes sense, moving forward, rather than one council having 2 seats. I think that period of the mayor being in place before reorganisation is implemented will be unusual. But then there are examples over the country where you've got mayors where that is still remaining elements of the 2-tier structure. The other thing I would say is, by definition, mayors are a bespoke model, aren't they? Because they're all about who's one person who's elected and their style and approach. So in some of the areas that mayors are created, they will probably have quite a fast agenda. In other parts of the country, it may take them longer to determine their priorities, recruit their team, determine what they want to do. And so I think to be honest, it's quite difficult to say until we know who wins the mayoral election, because they will all come on different platforms.
Okay, now have we looked at section 2 sufficiently now and happy with it, and we can move on? Okay, so Russell, can I ask you to talk to section 3, Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, the areas, economies and partnership working?
Thank you, Chair. So what this section sets out is the different areas in the wider region. So it sets out the economic areas, it sets out the partnership working that goes on at the moment across those areas, and what it shows is that the way we've designed the unitaries is very much around the economic areas as they exist at the moment, the travel to work areas that they exist at the moment, because we've based them around those 4 major population centres and urban economies, which I've touched on a number of times. What it also shows is that there is already a huge amount of partnership working on that basis, which is obviously helpful when you then come to create a council on that basis, because it gives you a platform for that. That's probably all I think I probably need to say to introduce it.
Okay, members, any questions on this? Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like and I understand and sort of broadly approve of the way this has been put together, particularly that focus on different economic areas, because there are different economic areas in Hampshire. And I grew up on on the Solent coast, down in South Hampshire. I now live in North Hampshire. They are different economies. You know, the Solent has that maritime element, looks to the south, looks to the sea as exports in a different way. Our area looks north, up the M3 to London, up those railroads to Waterloo, to the Blackwater Valley, to Surrey, to West Berkshire. It's just an entirely different approach. We live differently, we work differently, we earn our living differently. And so that's why I don't really understand where the County Council is coming from with their position. Their argument that rather than the Northern 3, you would add to that Winchester and East Hampshire, you start to get this very confused position. And I don't see how those councils really can get the best out of this part of the world when their economic strategy would be pulled in two directions. You'd be pulled in the direction, if you think about it, of Basingstoke and Farnborough to the north, but then they'd also have to serve your Rowlands, Castles, then also places that are really looking more towards the Solent themselves. So I think that's a recipe for confusion. I think it's a recipe for getting the economic strategy wrong and wasting a lot of time and energy and not delivering the results that we need, because we don't have the economic growth that we need in this country at the moment. And that's partly due to the government we have, but we have to think about how we get the structures right locally to deliver the maximum growth. And I worry a lot that the county's decision to put Test Valley in with New Forest, in with Southampton, will end up with a very confused set of authorities that don't know what areas of the world to focus on. And indeed, the risk would be that any particular administration would end up focusing on one area, north or south, over the other. And that's a situation that we want to avoid. So I think this focus on our 4 separate economic areas is fundamentally right and is probably more likely to succeed against those government criteria.
Thank you. Does that need a response? No, right, okay. It was more of a statement, wasn't it? Yes. Any other questions? Oh, I've got one. Now, I think we're saying that one of the strengths of our proposal is that they're sort of balanced new unitaries. I just want to sort of probe a bit on that, because there are some variations, because if you look at population size, you go from North Hampshire having a population of just over 400,000 to Mid Hampshire having a population of nearly 600,000. So I know it must be extraordinarily difficult to get every new unitary with 500,000 or thereabouts, but there's quite a big margin of difference there. And then there's I'd be interested to have views on the sort of inequalities of the unitaries, because some of the new unitaries are going to be they're going to have they're going to have lower housing delivery. Their average incomes are going to be appreciably lower. I think Portsmouth and Southampton is much lower than Mid Hampshire, and educational attainment. There may be variations there. Is it a case that that's how think that the cards fall as a result of dividing the county up into 4, or is there going to be mechanisms to assist other unitaries when it comes to helping overcome some of the inequalities and for instance some of the budget gaps that will be faced when this process if this process proceeds?
Thank you, Chair. So what we've certainly done as part of this process is tested balance. It was a core part of the options appraisal, and I think where we've got to is the most balanced position you could get to within the region, within the framework we had. So just on population, the only way you could actually, the mainland population is almost exactly 2 million. If you could start with a blank sheet of paper, you could have created authorities that were exactly 500,000 each. But obviously you have to use districts as building blocks, so we couldn't do that. But I think the authorities are well balanced as much as they can be. So if you look at, for example, page 54, you will see a number of key metrics per unitary area, ranging from GVA to unemployment to level of deprivation to how well they've delivered housing numbers to business rateable value to council tax base. Now, because for the reason I just said, you can never make that equal, and also because they're designed around economic areas, they're always going to be different because they're different economic areas, but they are relatively well balanced. And then coming to your point, Chair, about the financial case, what that shows is that both from the savings they can deliver, but also their council tax base, their business rates base, the reserves levels they will start with, they're all in a relatively balanced position. And they will all start from a strong position. So compared to other unitaries in the country, they will look really, really good compared to existing unitaries financially. Obviously, then it depends how they're run moving forward.
So if one thinks about the Isle of Wight and the geographic difficulties of treating that as aligning that with any of the other existing unitaries, how it's going to be a much smaller population on the Isle of Wight. It's about 140,000, isn't it? How for the residents of the Isle of Wight, how confident can they look to their future on the basis of the model that we're proposing here and submitting to government?
So the case is that the Isle of Wight retains its status as a separate island unitary in a similar way Jersey's a unitary, etc., etc. I've made Rebecca laugh a number of times about this, but the key reason for that is that there isn't a bridge. So the savings you would be able to get from if they were part of a mainland unitary are just not there, because you have to duplicate the services and infrastructure on the island, because it's only accessible by ferry, which is weather dependent. You can't turn around to your population one day and say, well, we're not going to provide any local government services today because the weather's bad and the ferries aren't running from Portsmouth and Southampton. So the savings you would normally get from scale don't apply in that same way. It sounds a funny argument, but that is a really fundamental argument. But what we have done, and they've been fully part of this process, is identified that there will be benefits and savings that can be made. So there will be a partnership between the 4 new unitaries on the mainland and the Isle of Wight, obviously a well-established unitary, to look at each of those redesign opportunities the unitaries on the mainland implement as they're moving forward, to see if they could be applied on the island, either on their own or on a shared basis, for example, with either the South West or South East unitary. But there isn't the case there would normally be to just merge them into one of the mainland unitaries because of that big expanse of water, basically.
Thank you. I think it was useful to bring that out because they have signed up to the proposal, so their leadership is supportive of what we're doing. They're not being sort of dragged into this against their will, but quite the reverse, as I understand it. Okay. Any other questions on this section? Are we content to move to the next one? Okay, the next section, section 4, is how our model meets the government's criteria.
Thank you, Chair. So this is by far the biggest part of the main document, over 100 pages. It sets out how the proposal meets each of the government criteria. it shows that each of the 3 variations fully meet the government criteria, and it sets out all the evidence for that. So, for example, on the section on high quality services, it sets out all the work that's been done to look at how services currently work, how they could be transformed, and what the benefits of that would be. Similarly, the section on finance sets out the summary of the financial case, which is in more detail in section 7, and how those new unitaries would be financially sustainable and able to withstand financial shocks. And it's perhaps just worth emphasising that point. They are very big unitary authorities, bigger than certainly has been created in most of the reorganisations in history. And then the other section, or the other parts of that section, show, for example, the approach that's been taken to community engagement within that part of the government criteria, how the new unitary authorities would support devolution, which we covered in answer to an earlier question, and a number of elements of detail. But it is a very long section, Chair, but I've done my best to pick out some of the highlights of 103 pages, I think it's.
Thank you, Russell. Yeah. Any questions or comments on this section? You're first again, Councillor Carr.
Apologies, Mr. Chairman. I wondered if I could explore the section in this around council tax and business rates harmonisation, because I think what residents may discover with some surprise is that this process isn't going to be free, and this process is going to cost everyone, and we're all going to feel it in our wallets. Basingstoke-Deane, of course, has one of the lowest council taxes of any of the districts that will merge into any of the districts across Hampshire. So, I think we're all going to feel the cost of bringing our council tax up to harmonise with others. I wondered if either the Chief Executive or Deputy Chief Executive could explain how that council tax harmonisation works over the 7-year period, because I think it's relatively complicated. And I think the other question I have is about how much it would change the tax paid by an average Band D property. Is it possible to project that at the moment? Because the document does project an additional revenue stream of 128 million over 10 years on the assumption of, I think, 5% increases every year to a unitary council. So is it possible to project what would happen to a Band D property if all things being equal?
So council tax harmonisation is set down in legislation. So it requires a local authority to have a single level of council tax within, or a uniform level of council tax must be set by year 8 or sooner. So you have 7 years basically to harmonise, and you can harmonise a lot quicker. And the problem with, there are pros and cons to this, and I'm sure this, if you're elected to one of the new unitaries, this will be a debate you will have. There are pros and cons to the speed of harmonisation. One of the issues with not harmonising quicker, you obviously then have a situation where residents on, say, one part of the borough, or even possibly one side of a street or one part of a village, are paying one level of council tax, which is very different to the one very near them. So that, if you like, is the argument for harmonising quickly. But the legislation basically sets out 7 years, and each year through whatever timescale you set within the 7 years you have, the gap must narrow between the highest charging predecessor area and the others. Now, exactly how you get there, the new authority can obviously set that within that framework as part of setting its budget strategy. So it will be up to the councillors elected to each new unitary to determine that. And government also has an element of control over this in terms of what capping limits on council tax rises and all those things that are part of the local government financial framework. And at the moment, we're not aware of any planned changes for this round of reorganisation, but then it is very early in that process. But the process, as I say, is a legislative one, and there are pros and cons to harmonising quickly, as opposed to taking the full 7 years you have.
Okay. Any other points? Can I just ask a question? We're proposing 4 unitaries here plus the Isle of Wight, but there are some services that have been provided over Hampshire as a whole, highways, waste services, education, adult social care, and to what extent can we reassure government and our residents that the model that we're putting forward is actually going to deliver better than that, and in fact there won't be problems and disruption to services, and the extent to which we would envisage the unitaries working together in the future?
So in terms of the case that we're looking at this evening, obviously this is a test to make sure that the models being put forward work. So as part of the process to get to the point of putting the business case together, we've looked at some of the services, some that the government have asked us to look at, sort of adults and children's services, but also those with the greatest opportunity to test whether there are future opportunities of bringing those services together. So that has been done at a high level. But the real work in terms of what you're referencing will be done should the Minister make a decision towards the 4 mainland unitary and the Isle of Wight option, or indeed any unitary configuration at implementation stage. So at that stage, what we would then start to do is run work streams for every service across both the services the boroughs and the districts run, but also, of course, the County Council runs, and start to look at how those would best be delivered. And I think there are probably different levels to that. So there will be some services that when they're looked at in detail, it makes absolute sense, both from a customer perspective, also a financial perspective, to run them across the county. So you referenced waste, and waste is a very good example of that in terms of the disposal infrastructure. So, I mean, you could split the disposal infrastructure up, but actually I would view it that it would probably be most cost effective and better customer service for our residents to have that together collectively, and be easier to invest in that. So that's one example of something you might want to keep collectively across the county. There will be other services that when they're looked at, it's considered that perhaps it might not be safe to disaggregate them in the first instance. So that's probably more around things like children and adults, where you might want to keep things together at least for a period of time until they can be safely decoupled. Some of those, there may be a view that they need to stay together across districts, or sorry, across unitary areas, but others can then be distanded safely over a period of time going forward. And some of that will be how then the unitaries work together. So children and adults are again quite a good example of that, because it will be different for each of the 4 mainland unitaries. Because if you consider Portsmouth and Southampton, they already run and operate as unitaries as it is. So when the elements of county services are disaggregated into them, they already have models for how they run children and adults. So the disaggregation will look very different to them. It will be different in the Mid-Hampshire Unitary and the North Hampshire Unitary, because currently we don't run children's and adult services here within any unitary council. So we'll be starting those services from scratch. So there's great opportunity in that, but also in order to run those services safely and effectively, there might be opportunity for working together across those two unitaries to safely deliver. That doesn't necessarily mean you want to share services going forward, but actually in terms of the setup and making sure that you set those services up well, there is more opportunity for collaboration between the two unitaries.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Paul. Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up from where Rebecca left that off, I think one of the most interesting feedback from the consultation that we've done so far, particularly with some of our key partners, has been the opportunity to co-design services. So a significant excitement, endorsement and enthusiasm from the health sector and from our education partners around us being open to transformation in a way whereby we genuinely look at co-design. So health together with us as local government, not separate silos. And again, this underlines the point that colleagues were making earlier. What sets us apart from the county council is that isn't business as usual. That's not simply saying that you redraw the boundaries and carry on as the county council have been doing. A lot of those partners would welcome the opportunity to engage in a new, fresh way. And also, you have significant talent in the county council staff that we would welcome working with our staff, with those partners, that over that period that Rebecca highlights would hopefully give us that innovation that we're looking for better services. So that's been an interesting conversation with partners so far of where they see the opportunity in that.
Councillor Golding.
Could I ask, and you may not be able to answer this for me, but you mentioned waste and waste management. What is the appetite there? Because I have to admit my heart just sank at the thought of keeping it all the same, because I think we're really failing residents at the moment. As a, Hampshire as a whole, I think is in terms of the real small limited quantity that we recycle and process.
So we haven't got there yet. I was just using it as one example that's been done elsewhere where they've kept their infrastructure together. I suppose when you come to look at things like that, it will be whether actually it's better for our customers and more cost effective to be able to invest in it as a whole, or whether splitting it up would be better. And that will be the sort of test you'll look at to see whether actually we want to keep services together at a county-wide level or bring them down into the unitaries, or indeed share amongst unitaries. But that will go into detail in the implementation stage at workstream. So it was just an example that's an obvious one that's been done elsewhere that might go ahead in that way in Hampshire.
Councillor Carr, I think you had a... Oh, yes. Sorry, if we can invite Jonathan to say.
Thank you, Chair. So my question really is about the criteria that aren't in the 44 and how we're going to approach those, things like the environmental impacts, etc. Obviously, they had to merge down criteria into a certain amount. Do we know how they fell upon the 44? Do you know if work is going to now be carried out on items that aren't in those 44? For example, the environment and whatnot.
So the 44 were developed by the councils and their advisors KPMG because they best tested the 6 government criteria. In the government criteria, as Rebecca's alluded to, they set out certain areas they particularly wanted to test. So they were things like adults, children's services, special educational needs, etc. And so that's how we've designed it, because it's in response to the government's invitation, those criteria they set. But that's not to say we haven't talked lots about the environment in the many hundreds of hours the 12 councils have spent together in workshops and other meetings, because of course we have, and will be a priority, I'm sure, of all the new unitary councils that are created by the government. So, for example, it's referenced in the guiding principles the councils came up with as part of their vision. But what the document is doing is responding to those 6 government criteria, if that makes sense.
Okay, Jonathan? Yeah. Councillor Carr?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question about financial inheritance. So, of course, at the moment you've got as many budgets as you've got councils, and you've got detailed information in here about total reserves of, I think, 1.8 billion across all of those councils. And we've got information here about some of the debt of each of the councils in percentage terms. What's not in here necessarily is differences in assets owned by the different councils. One of the reasons we've been able to keep borough council tax low here is that we have got an excellent financial officer team, of course, but some really strong property assets that help us with revenue. So I think my question is, how will the financial inheritance across debt, assets and budget gap be split up? We're going down from 15 to 5. How will those reserves be split? How will that budget gap be split? How will those assets be split? I think there are three separate things there, and I think we need to consider what's the methodology by which that will be split up. Is it purely population terms? So, you've got 20% of the population, so you get 20% of the good and the bad, or are there factors that you consider after population, such as relative GVA per capita? I mean, obviously we know that business rates are split and cycled through the central government machine. There's a mechanism there. So I'm wondering, what's the mechanism for splitting up the financial inheritance?
So the starting point is negotiation. So it has to be agreed between the new authorities. So there's been numerous pieces of research done on previous reorganisations, and one of the things from a best practice point that comes out of all of them is you need to get on with agreeing that as soon as possible, because there is at least one example I can think about where years after vesting they still actually hadn't agreed the split of all those things between the new unitaries, and I don't know that area, so I don't know if there were particular political disagreements or exactly what happened. But that is the starting point, is through negotiation. There are some principles that underpin that. So if an asset is in your area as a new council, the starting point is you would inherit that. However, that still may be subject to negotiation, because, for example, it might be some specialist asset that served the whole county, and there is now multiple unitaries, and so the fact you've got it would still be a point of negotiation about potentially those other unitaries having access to their asset, or you sharing it, or there being some financial transaction to compensate for it. Usually in terms of splitting cash, that would usually be on, for example, a population basis. But again, and the same goes with debt, it depends, because income streams could be linked to a particular contract, debt could be linked to a particular asset. So, if you like, there isn't a simple answer. It's broadly, population would be one of the logical ways to disaggregate and reaggregate, but it's not as simple as that. Usually if an asset's in your boundary, that would be where it ends up, but it's not as simple as that, and ultimately it all has to be agreed through negotiation. Obviously the government has powers of direction and can intervene if necessary, but that's one of the key things we're actually working on now in terms of building out the implementation plan, is to work out what are the things that need to be in that plan to get all that done adequately by vesting day, because the ideal starting point is you've done it all by the time you launch, and you've agreed, the shadow authorities have got agreements on all the big disaggregation and reaggregation issues.
You want to carry on?
Just a very quick follow-up then. So initial conversations will be had about splitting the inheritance ahead of the shadow elections, then those elected to the shadow elections essentially review where we've got to and pick up from there. Okay, that's fine.
Councillor Golding.
I was saving my questions until the financial chapter, but we've started it now, so I'll carry on. So in one of the appendices, and I'll admit I can't find it now, it did talk about unallocated reserves, and it had literally, I checked the maths, it didn't look at population at all. It just kind of went, well, North Hampshire is these three authorities and this is the reserves they have, so that's the reserves they'll keep. That's not sounding like what you're now saying.
No, it's none of it can be determined until the shadow authority, because it's all got to be done by negotiation. What we're trying to show in these documents is the amount of available reserves, which I think are just under 1.8 billion to be shared across the 4 unitaries. Population will be one of the things that's used as a basis to argue the split on that. The existing authorities or the predecessor authorities are another basis for that. But some of those will be earmarked to particular or connected to particular projects and bits of infrastructure. So it's not as simple to just split them like that. There needs to be a negotiation. The thing I would say in all the work we've done on the financial case is both of those, all of those new unitaries should start with very healthy reserve positions. What they do with those reserves moving forward will depend on, how they're run. But so I suppose what the overriding point is, it's all subject to negotiation between the new shadow authorities.
Hannah, you'll follow on.
Sorry, follow up. In those, so they were non-earmarked reserves, so it was separated in the appendices, anything that was attached to a project, which I think is right, obviously we treat differently. What was interesting to me was that there was individual reserves for everything but Hampshire County Council. Do they not have any non-earmarked reserves? That's quite a complex question to answer. So it's all about your interpretation of earmarking. And different chief finance officers and different councils have a different approach to this. So the global figure is there's 1.8 billion. All the councils, as part of this process, were asked to say what was available reserves. From memory, I think Hampshire County Council came back saying none. But clearly their reserve levels are quite high and they cannot all be totally committed, in my opinion. So I think there is an element of style and approach probably from their finance team.
Councillor Jones.
Just answered my question actually, but I'll ask it a bit plainer. What happens to the debt of the county when there's no county? Where's the debt going?
So the government's position has been with this as the same as everything else. It should be dealt with locally, unless it is one of the areas, Surrey being the well spoken about example, where that debt is of such a level that it would be very difficult for those new unitaries to manage that debt. So the debt in Surrey is approaching 6 billion. It's less than half that in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight in total. So the position is it would pass on a basis to be negotiated again, but pro rata being an obvious starting point for that, to the new unitaries. I suppose the thing I would say about debt is they remember also those new unitaries will inherit a whole range of landed assets, some, potentially quite a number that can be rationalised, and some of that capital can be used to pay down some of that debt. I think the reason the government have particularly talked about Surrey is at such a big figure, the it would be very difficult to see how they could pay that sort of amount significantly down, or how the new unitaries could easily manage the repayments on that.
Councillor Watts.
Thank you. It was the same, well, I think you probably answered it. In the appendices, I can't remember which appendice it was, you specified Hert's got smallest debt and Rushmore slightly more. I didn't see any figures for the county in there, and where was that going? I think you tried to explain it.
So the county's debt figures are certainly in there. Everyone's debt figures are in there. Obviously, we're the only council that doesn't have any. So there's no figure in for us, but everyone else is in there. And, you know, that predecessor debt will be passed to the new unitaries. And that is the way that it works.
Okay, everyone? Right, are we satisfied now that we've scrutinised that particular section sufficiently? Okay. Right, well, the next one is the Isle of Wight case for remaining as a existing unitary council. Am I at liberty to... you want to say something? No, I'm at liberty to move on to the next section then. So section 6 is the alignment of our proposal to other government priority policy areas. Russell.
Thank you, Chair. So again, this is a relatively short section. It just sets out basically how our proposal for the 4 mainland unitaries and the Isle of Wight aligns with other things the government have set out as a priority. So, for example, because we've based those new unitaries around economic areas and with a big focus on how those unitaries can best drive economic growth, it actually aligns very well with what the government has published in its industrial strategy. Similarly, our plans for high-cost services like adult social care to be very much delivered, tailored to local needs on a neighbourhood basis, very much aligns with the government's new strategy for the NHS, which is all about micro-provision, and it goes through a number of government policy areas and shows how the proposal aligns. Similarly, it sets out, or the proposal aligns well with the government's planned new outcomes framework for local government, which is like a new performance management framework to test local government against. So it's a relatively short section, but just sets out some alignment with other changing policy areas in the country.
Members. Shall I get us going then? Just on local democracy. So I think a lot of our residents would say that one of the strengths of Basingstoke and Dean is that we're close to our residents, well connected, and they can get to us much more so than others that they might have to deal with. We're inevitably, as a result of moving to a unitary over a much bigger geographical area, it won't be that level of representation and will be affected. In the proposal, we are saying that we would envisage, I think, 85 councillors representing North Hampshire unitary, so covering Basingstoke, Hart and Rushmore. At the moment, we've got 54 councillors representing just Basingstoke. So I suppose my question is, how confident are you that our residents are going to still feel that there's good democratic representation being provided by the new unitary? And now I've got another question, but I'm just trying to think what it was. No, we'll park it there, and I hope it comes back into my head.
I think this is a really important question for residents. So we have wards in borough, we have divisions in county. I don't think the process should be based on divisions. The idea of 15,000 people per area of representation is too large. I think we've actually got the sweet spot in Basingstoke of around 8,000 roughly per our wards. I think that is a very good figure for representation. The 85 in the document is an indicative figure related to the argument we're making here. There will then be a further conversation to be had about the inception of the new authority as to what the starting position will be, much as there was in Buckinghamshire when it became unitary. There is then going to be a boundary review, because there will have to be, and we will have a debate then, and the various organisations related to wanting to take part in that will have to make their case to the Boundary Commission about what they think the future of that should be. I think more councillors we have, the better, in the context of achieving a representation level that meets our residents' expectations, John, as you rightly say. So from that perspective, if you take the county example, there are 20 county divisions across North Hampshire. Nowhere near is that enough representation, even if you made it 3 members per division. It doesn't get out the blocks at all. And I think if we take our argument seriously, that we are about connection to community and an enhanced role for members within their communities as well. Because if you think about the casework that will be coming in the context of social services, in the context of children's services, and the responsibilities as members therein they would have, then that representation level to achieve what we already do as casework, take on those other responsibilities, and for example, even highways, as just another example of an area of responsibility, then having enough councillors to do the job of running the authority, holding the administration, whoever that is, to account to whatever committee structure is set up, and then also do the level of casework our residents would expect, becomes a really important question. So as a personal view, I think wards are better than divisions. I think we've probably got a sweet spot in Basingstoke as to what our level of representation is, and that repeated across the whole of North Hampshire through a boundary review will become a debate during that process.
But I think I'm right in saying that we're currently a ratio of 1 councillor for 3,390 odd residents, and these proposals would increase that to 1 councillor per 4,839. Is that?
But it is critical to say it is indicative as part of the
It's
argument. It is
indicative.
not where it will land in reality.
Yeah, that's okay, fine. Thank you. Now, I have remembered the other question I have, but if I may, and I'll come back to you. Given that these are bigger, covering a bigger area, bigger population, what would you envisage in the North Hampshire context in terms of enabling neighbourhood community democracy to flourish? And what would you envisage in terms of entrusting accountability and responsibilities to sort of the more local level?
Thank you, Chair. So what we've set out in the proposal is like anything else, this will be up to the shadow authorities of the new unitaries, but what we've set out in the proposal is that those neighbourhood arrangements will be co-designed with the existing parish town councils, with community groups, with partners to work out what neighbourhood arrangements they want. So, for example, the unitary I came from had a range of sort of neighbourhood committees and had area committees for certain things, had a rural committee, had committees for each town, and you can go quite a long way down that delegation route. Or you can, and there are different approaches to that, but all the good practices that where this has worked best across the country is that you actually work with your communities to design what works for each area, and that you don't just set out, if you like, a top-down solution to that, to say, I don't know, you're going to have 6 area committees and they're all going to be this size, that you actually work with the communities to work out what works best. And you may well have a different approach where you don't have town and parish councils as opposed to where you do have town and parish councils for example. And just finishing off the bit about councillor numbers, it's important to say, and I was out of the room, but I'm sure the leader mentioned this, we were asked to put indicative numbers in by the government, which we've done, based on research on ratios from other unitaries, based on local government for boundary committee guidance, but it actually isn't up to any of the existing councils or actually the new councils. It will be up to the boundary committee to come in and do a formal review, and as political groups, for those of you who've been through a boundary committee review, you will all be able to make submissions. I assume the reason it's in here is because the government wanted to understand indicatively what it would look like, rather than, they definitely won't be the final numbers, if that makes sense. It will be up to the boundary committee.
Thank you. Councillor, was it Councillor Jones? Yes.
Just what, you're keeping the parish council, as I understand, for this. What happens to Basingstoke? Do we revert back to 70 in the 70s to town council? Because otherwise we're underrepresented.
I think that's to be determined. I mean, one of the interesting things for us in the future to think about, and then the new authority to think about, is the opportunity to do things afresh. So our parish councils and town councils as they currently exist are not touched. They will continue because they're not part of this process, therefore they will be what they are. We may choose, or they may choose, to have a governance review in different ways, so they may choose to examine that in the future. That's a choice for them to make with a new authority. The other way of looking at it is, one size fits all shouldn't be the answer. If we are truly wanting localism, then it needs to come from the community. This is the opportunity to experiment. So there may be parts of the town that would like to become parishes. There may be parts of the town that would like to have community associations and residents associations in its form.
Parts of the town that can't afford to go to parish.
Exactly. So we should not think of a solution top down. The solution has to come bottom up. And I think the responsibility of the new authority is then to support that experiment in democracy. If there's one thing we can need to do is connect residents with what we do to prove that politics has value, to prove that we have value as a local council in their lives, and that's something this could do.
At the end of the day, what you're saying is Whitchurch, Tadley, they've got an advantage over the rest of the large areas, largest areas, because they've got they're running as a town council and parishes, as I understand it. And what we've got mostly, especially my ward and a lot of wards across even your ward, a lot of people can't afford it. So therefore we're on the back foot before we get started. We've lost our mayor, which has been there for blooming so many years. We're not talking about an elected one now. I know we've run it down over the years because people don't agree with it. Well, I do agree with it. And I think that these things that need to be approached and brought out in the open, because I think the public agree with it. And where's it going? If you ain't got a town council, who's going to do it? One little section, just like twinning, but we don't do that no more. You remember that, Paul? We used to have a committee for twinning. Well, that's how it disappears.
I think the important thing to say is our civic mayors do not have to end. That is a choice that could be made to continue with the civic mayor, because there's one in Rushmore and there's one in Basingstoke. There's no need for that to end. We could, well, the authority can choose to establish, if it wants to, that it has civic mayors. There may be a chair of the meeting that takes place as the council, but there is absolutely nothing to stop that authority, should it choose to, continue with the civic mayors. I think in terms of the democracy point, Tony, I think that's really important, and I disagree with you. I think there is an argument to say that you're right about the cost of it and about people's desire for it. It has to come from them. You can't just impose what you think a town council should be on everybody. If a community in Basingstoke wants to establish a parish council, we should encourage them to do so and enable them to do so. If they don't, because the very reasons you say, then there are other forms of engagement, be they neighbourhood committees, residents' associations. There's so many different ways, people's assemblies. There are so many different ways you can get people to engage in what we do, and actually the decisions that affect their lives that we should be doing. It shouldn't be one size fits all, but we're not going to decide that. They need to decide it, and the new council will decide that when they shape it.
How do we do it?
Well, they will do it, Tony.
You know, we're imposed on this.
No respect.
But at the end of the day, you're
I think you wanted to say something, Russell, did you?
Yeah, I was just going to say a little bit about the sort of civic and ceremonial element. So it's referred to in the case that as part of the legal process for establishing the new unitaries, there's a couple of forms of orders that are created to abolish councils and establish new ones. The first is a structural change order, which basically abolishes the existing structure of local government and replaces it with unitaries. And the second is, I can't remember the technical term, but the civil servants call it a wash-up order, which is where you include all the other legal bits. In that, we have set out that there are a number of things we would need included. One is the existing mayoralties. So the civic mayoralties would need to be in that order. Then there's city status for the 3 existing cities of Winchester, Southampton and Portsmouth. And there are a number of other ceremonial things, such as, I think it's called the Admiral of Portsmouth and things like that, that all need to be in that legal order that goes through Parliament. And it's really important, and there's a process with government to do it, because if you don't do it, you lose them, basically. But there is a process to
I think as a committee, though, we might agree that this is an area that we would wish to highlight to the cabinet and full council the importance of enabling local democracy, whether that's at a Basingstoke level or at a smaller, more neighbourhood level. But it's something that it will ultimately be decided by the new unitary authorities, but that's something I'm sure that we think is a very important consideration for the future. Agreed, Tony? Yeah. Thank you. Right, Gary, did you have something else you wanted to?
Yeah, I don't want to be parochial again, talk about councillors, but I looked at Southampton and Portsmouth. Their ratio is over 5,000 at the moment, and ours is 3.5 per electorate per councillor. And I still don't understand, you got this figure of 85, so we're going to go in 2027 for 85 councillors? Or we're going to go on existing boundaries, same as Hart as Rushmore, so we're going to have 129 councillors going for election in 18 months' time?
Can I comment? So they're completely different processes, but it is complex. So what the government have asked us to do is to put into the proposal indicative numbers that would be the permanent arrangement. So that's once the new unitary authorities have established and vested. As I touched on earlier, they can only be indicative because it's not up to us, it's up to the boundary committee. Completely separate to that process is the arrangements for the shadow authorities, which are established a year before vesting. To create a shadow authority, you obviously have to have an election. The boundary committee cannot do 21 county areas before May 27. So they will have to be on existing wards or divisions. There is a separate process, and this will get put in the structural change order, to create a temporary arrangement for those elections, which will either have to be the existing district wards, either on the existing number of members per ward or a different number of members per ward, or on the county divisions, which would have to be on a different number of members per ward. because there wouldn't be enough councillors. Yeah, exactly. That is the only legal way to do that election. There isn't any other legal way, and it will be in the structural change. Or we've started talking to MHCLG about this. There'll be a whole process with them to determine what that looks like. What looks best is using district wards. The question is it district wards with the total number of councillors we've got now, or is it district wards with a different number of councillors per ward? And there, I'm sure, will be different views from the political groups who will be able to feed into that process, but ultimately it will be up to government and it will go through Parliament. But that is only for the first election to the shadow authority, because by the time you have another election, the boundary committee will have come in, done a full and thorough review, probably designed completely different wards anyway, and determined what the permanent range would be. So if you like, there's actually three different elements to it, which so it is complex.
Councillor Golding.
So you say till the next election, would that be 4 years? So it would be, by default, we'd go to all-out elections, we wouldn't do thirds?
So certainly, since all the reorganisations have been available, there have been governments of different political control have not given any option other than all-out 4-yearly elections. So a thirds has never been allowed, as far as I'm aware, for some time.
Okay, right. So have we examined that section sufficiently? I think we can move on to section 7, financial case, the money, including financial modelling of costs, benefits and payback period, encompassing transformation opportunities. Russell.
So this section obviously sets out the financial case. It's obviously been developed using data from all 15 councils, but worked on by the 12 chief finance officers and the KPMG finance team. KPMG have a lot of experience of reorganisation, including doing the most recent one, which involves splitting up a county council into multiple unitaries. We've very much drawn in building this financial case on the learning from other reorganisation processes. So all the assumptions we've put in there in terms of change costs, savings levels, etc., have been informed by benchmarking other reorganisations from the past. Now, in terms of a financial case, as we've talked about in more informal settings, there are a couple of sort of, if you like, key tests the government looks at. The first is payback period. So that's how quickly the change pays back its change costs, because obviously abolishing 14 organisations and creating 4 new ones creates a whole range of change costs. And then the second is the net recurring benefit each year you get post the change. So that's the net savings per year once you've completed that reorganisation. Now, how we've structured that financial case is into a base case. So this is, if you like, a prudent view of the world, which we know can be delivered. But we've also done what we've called a high case, but some of you who've been involved in looking at performance management in the past would perhaps see it as a stretch case. So it's got a more ambitious and faster approach to change and transformation. So the base case shows a payback period of 3 years, and then annual net savings of just under 64 million a year. There is one slight variation for the option that, or the variation that includes boundary changes around the southern unitaries, in that it has a very slightly higher payback period because it's got slightly higher disaggregation costs, due to the fact that you're disaggregating districts as well as the county council. And then the high or stretch case achieves a payback of its costs in 2.3 years and annual savings of just under 92 million a year once that change has been completed. And then within the financial case, is a whole range of detail and spreadsheets and graphs about how those overall figures have been formed.
Thank you. Right, any questions? Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think it's probably worth understanding, just from a perspective of the resident and the audience, the reason that I think we're talking about payback period is because we are paying for these changes. This is there's a very, very, very small amount of money the government have made available to support some of this thinking across all of England. I think 7 million, but that the cost of making these changes is something that Hampshire taxpayers obviously are going to have to carry, and that's why we're talking about how long it will take for those savings to pay that back. I think it's just worth understanding that. I have a specific question about savings and potential benefits accruing from consolidation, workforce exit, workforce transformation, those sorts of things. At what point does your methodology here assume that some of those decisions are made? Does it assume that, consolidation, workforce, estates, transformation all starts from the shadow authority coming forwards, or does it presume that a number of these transition and innovation and implementation costs start being made before shadow election day? I think the fundamental point there is Basingstoke and Deane, in consultation with Hart and Rushmore, going to start making decisions, or is it all going to land from from shadow election day?
So the financial case is based on essentially from the shadow authority year onwards. If you like, separate to that, there will be a decision for us and the other councils, and I think we touched on this earlier in the discussion, about things we might decide are prudent to do earlier than that. So, for example, we already share some district services. Our view as senior officers, and certainly the discussions we've had with the other two councils, is that certainly from the point the government makes a decision, if that is February, we could look to have more integration in advance of this change happening for district services. One, because that would be more potentially save some money for the existing authorities, but also, if you like it, reduces all the change or the amount of change all happening on that one vesting day. But they're all decisions to come, and they will things we will look at and discuss with members as we go forward. But none of those have been assumed in the financial case. The financial case goes from shadow authority onwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick follow-up on that. So, thank you for the clarification. I think there is something about getting ahead of the game, potentially being sensible. I think then if you assume the government say yes to North Hampshire, you assume there's a desire to make some of those changes about the 3 districts and how their services move together. I think the question then becomes one of process. How will those decisions be made in terms of those pre-implementation decisions, and how will those pre-implementation decisions be scrutinised, conscious that it's not just this council making decisions, but our other 2 potential partners?
So there's a multi-part answer to that. So it is good practice to look at, from the point the government makes a decision, to look at before a shadow authority is formally established, as in before there's been an election to shadow authority, to look at establishing a joint committee. That would be what the government would expect. In advance of that, if you like, it would be the existing structures of the current sovereign councils and the scrutiny processes around that. And then from the point of the shadow authority, so establish the office of the shadow authority.
Anyone else? Councillor Jones.
Yeah, I think we touched on this. What are we doing about setting council tax leading into this as a council here? It seems strange that we'll be setting a council tax of what we want to spend and what everything else. I know that. But where we're so out of kilter with the rest of if it goes ahead, how will we set our council tax? Have we thought about that?
So our current council tax would be set through the normal process, and all the current government framework capping limits apply. So as you know, we don't actually have that much discretion in terms of council tax limits. And the harmonisation legal framework wouldn't apply until yes, exactly, yeah.
Okay, if I could just ask a few questions. If you look at the financial model, the largest deliverables in terms of savings are right-sizing of the organisations which are to the tune of over 32 million, and service contract consolidation of 24.5 million. What is this? What are these proposed changes? This move to unitary is going to mean for the staff of Basingstoke and Dean Council?
Of our existing council or all the councils?
Both, I think. You could.
So I suppose there's a number of things there. So there are obviously a lot of savings you can make by removing duplicate posts, and that's built into those figures. So our head of our HR won't mind me saying this because we always use her as the example, but there's 14 heads of HR at the moment. There will only need to be 4 in the future. There's 14 chief executives at the moment. There will only need to be 4 in the future. You go through the management structure, that will apply in each case. Similarly, there are I see Councillor Carr looking slightly bemused. I'm assuming, as the Isle of Wight's staying as it is, I've removed them from those calculations. Similarly, there are a range of specialist posts where there are efficiencies that can be made, particularly in back office and support services. So they're all built in. So the staffing savings you usually make through a reorganisation are usually 1 to 2% in totality. However, this is on tens of thousands of staff, and so on that level of staff you have a level of turnover where you can do a lot of it without compulsory redundancy, not all of it. But I suppose the overriding thing I would say is, in terms of frontline staff, there's still just as much grass to cut. There's just as many bins to collect. There's just as many adult social care assessments to do. There's just as many children to educate. So in terms of frontline staff and the staff directly dealing with the public, there's not anything like as big an effect. It's more in the infrastructure of the organisations and the people who support that where the savings are made initially. And something we've talked about in the regular staff briefings we do, is in a unitary you have a lot more opportunities as a member of staff. There are a lot more jobs in a lot more range of different areas, and particularly for people who are ambitious and are keen to try different things because of the high level of turnover. So for example, we've got about 700 staff at the moment. A North Hampshire unitary will be somewhere between 7,000 to 8,000. The opportunities you have are just much greater. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, as well.
Okay. Conscious it's 9 o'clock, and well, I think we're sort of we can run till 9:30 and beyond if we wish to. I hope we actually get through this by 9:30, but are we content to carry on? Yeah, fine, okay.
I'm afraid I shall be going by 9:30.
Right, well, we'll try and get it done.
Sorry?
We'll try and get it done by then. Just one other question from me. The financial model looks at the costs and the savings of going through reorganisation with this 4 unitary model, and it looks quite rosy in terms of payback within 3 years and a recurring annual benefit of something in the order of £64 million. But what it doesn't do is actually give any indication of just how solvent or otherwise the new unitary authorities are going to be in the future, because one has to bear in mind, although Basingstoke and Deane has for a long time been a solvent council, we have to be aware that the biggest player, Hampshire County Council, is not, and considerably so. And so there is going to be a financial inheritance arising from the services that are going to be transferred if this proposal goes forward from Hampshire to the unitaries. Is there anything you could sort of comment on that, or explain why it's not there in the model?
Certainly. So there's a whole range of CIPFA guidance and similar that the government has asked us to follow in how you do this financial case. And the idea of the financial case is that it tests is the new system going to be cheaper and more efficient than the current system? What it's not meant to do is try and deal with try and test all the decisions those new unitaries will have to make about where they prioritise their resources, because it can't do that, and there's no one who's got elected to those councils to take those decisions. So it doesn't bind the medium-term financial strategy of those new councils, because it can't. What it's saying is the current system going to be bettered, as in bettered by the new system, as in will the new system be cheaper and more efficient? In terms of predecessor budget gaps, which obviously there is one that is very large that we all know about, which is the county council, it's impossible to predict where that will be 1st of April 2028. Certainly they cannot just not address it, because if they don't address it, they'll have issued a Section 114 notice, and government commissioners will take it over and they'll be addressing it. Inevitably, because of a whole range of factors, all those unitaries will have savings that they have to deliver for every model. The unitary I was in always had a massive saving target every single year, because that's the nature of being a unitary. What the financial case shows is that they will start from a strong position. They will have a whole range of reorganisation savings to benefit from that can contribute to future budget gaps. So they will be in a good place to start with. They'll have significant reserves, income streams, etc. But then, like anything else, and this goes for any organisation, how they do moving forward will be determined by what priorities they have, what plans they have, and how well run they are. So if you like, this is a test in at the point in time. That's all it can ever be.
No, thank you for that explanation. All right. Any other questions on the money? Councillor Carr.
Just one. Risks. We've obviously detailed how we feel the finances will move forwards in this model, but looking at it, what would you say are the key financial risks of this local government reorganisation? What might go wrong? Where do you think things might go wrong? What's the most likely set of risks that you see?
So there's obviously a whole process you go through when implementing reorganisation to try and manage risk down as much as possible. I think if you look at other reorganisations where they've been most troubled, or where they've had the biggest difficulty to start with as new unitaries, is because the predecessor councils haven't engaged openly and honestly with each other. And so I can't actually remember which county area it is, but the one 3 years after reorganisation, when they still didn't actually each have a balance sheet because they were still arguing over the disaggregation of the previous county council, is a bad example. I think the biggest risk is that all 15 counties, so say the government take a decision in February, if all the 15 councils then need to work together collaboratively, so not just the 12 in this proposal, whatever the government decide, all 15 need to work together openly and collaboratively to make this happen in the best possible way for our residents and communities. If everyone doesn't engage, or if, for example, one or more are unhappy with the outcome and go to the courts with judicial reviews and basically don't start engaging in all that planning and preparation work until they absolutely have to, and don't start sharing all the contracts and everything and all the systems information and all the financial information that's a level of granularity that hasn't been needed for a business case, that adds a whole range of risk, because the risk is you start on day one without really fully understanding what as a new council you're inheriting, either from a contractual commitment, a liability, and so on and so forth. And I certainly very much hope that doesn't happen, but I think that's the biggest risk to implementing new unitary councils, that you basically don't start from a full understanding because everyone hasn't engaged.
Councillor Carr.
Thank you. Just a quick then follow-up from that. What is the mechanism to encourage partners who haven't been part of this process, should the government decide in our favour? What is the process to encourage their full cooperation? Is there an element of MHCLG involvement there, informal or otherwise? That's the first point. And then the second point is, obviously, for a lot of this conversation, we've assumed that the government will take this view forwards. If the government decides to, say, move forward with the county council's position, or a kind of hybrid of the two, is there a commitment from the council to accept that? Or will a view be taken that we may be the ones who take the judicial review forwards? Has that and that, Constance Russell, that may be a political conversation rather than for yourself, but has that conversation been had in that sense?
So maybe if I start and I'll let the leader comment on the more political elements. So the ministry has powers of direction, so they can direct councils to do certain things. They have talked in this process about using powers of direction. Certainly once the shadow authorities are established, there are powers to stop the predecessor authorities doing negative things. That's not the same as engaging cooperatively, but entering into new contracts of high value, etc. But any decision like that can of course equally be judicially reviewed. So there are examples in history of local government reorganisations that were significantly affected by judicial review, at least timetable wise. I think what's slightly different about legal challenge this time is this isn't new legislation. This is the 2007 Act, which has been subject to a number of legal challenges and has been heavily tested through the courts. So I think perhaps judicial review is less likely but not impossible. Certainly, from an officer point of view, we've never had that discussion in terms of legally challenging anything. And I don't know if you know.
And it's interesting to think where we stand in the current process. Our business community has made its voice very, very clear. I think our residents have made their voice very, very clear, 10 to 1 in the survey conducted here. I think our MPs, both cross-party, because they're all the parties, are making their views very, very clear where they feel about where the proposal should sit. But your question is quite true. Were we not to be the ones chosen, then I think we would have to have a very serious, responsible conversation, all of us and group leaders, to find a way through what our reaction would be. And I think it would be upon us to be responsible for our residents in that process. We need to be the adults in the room in that context. But I think you're right, there's some conversations that would need to be had at that time. Right here, right now, the level of support being expressed for our proposals is very significant, and I hope the government and MHCLG would take note of that in the decisions they make. But we've still got to win that consultation that takes place later this year, and then we've still got to lobby and make sure that the minister who actually makes the decision is fully aware of where we all and our community stand in that. Mobilising support for that would be huge.
Yeah, could I suggest that as a committee we might say that whatever the outcome of this process, that we as a committee would expect, in the interest of our residents, that the existing councils will all act in a very responsible way to make sure that the change in local government reorganisation is carried through in the interest of our residents. We agree with that.
Just to say, can I put it on record that the 12 authorities working together, as we have done, to come up with this document has been a very collaborative, very constructive process. Our advisors have been great, but it's also worth calling out all the officers from every single authority who have put hours and hours and hours and hours, yes, coordinated and supported by our officers here in many ways. And I just think we need to say that because it's been a massive collegiate effort to get to this, and it really is worth saying that. And I hope that those who are not part of this hear that message, so when it comes to that crunch, they engage constructively with us for the sake of their own staff, let alone the residents who they serve. That's important as well in this equation, because we want to take those staff on in the new authorities in a way that is constructive and positive and engages their talent. And then similarly so, I think, in terms of the responsibility to our residents.
So we might add construct as well as positively to the approach in the future. All right? You go agreed? Good. Okay. Right. Any other questions on this? Nope. So I think we now move to the last section, which is the implementation plan.
So this just sets out the proposed implementation plan. So it sets out on page 197 the timetable that would be run through, and also looks at governance structures to drive that forward. In terms of the timetable, it identifies the phasing that you would need to move through to get to vesting day and day one, and sets out all the activities that could sit with that phasing. So it starts effectively from the phase that we are in now, which is preparation effectively. So we've done a lot of that work clearly to get to the case that you have in front of you today. And then sets out what the next stages might look like should the Minister wish to go ahead with the proposal from the foundational stage, which is appointing strategic partners and progressing what's the scope, looking at service alignments and all of the work we described earlier, and preparing for elections, and then what would take place post the election of members to shadow authorities. So it's just worth saying that a lot of this needs to be worked through still in a lot more detail that gives an idea of what it looks like. You know, we have the opportunity now to start working on what implementation in the next phase could really look like. And of course, post-election to shadow authorities is then up to the shadow authority to decide how they might wish to take it forward. But it gives an idea of what it could look like and the timetable that it's set against.
Thank you, Rebecca. Anyone got any questions? Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question of clarification. In, I think it's 198, the table there, there's a reference to appointing a strategic partner. What's that a reference to? Who would that be? Is that a sort of a KPMG equivalent?
So it is a sort of a KPMG equivalent. So we've obviously used KPMG to date. There's decisions to be made about whether we continue with them moving forward, but it's about who helps us get to that collaborative working across Hampshire, really, to then drive the programme forward across the whole region.
That was going to be my question. So any other questions on the implementation plan? Councillor Carr.
I suppose only to say, I think this is obviously going to be a very complicated process. But I think the way that we've approached it within Basingstoke and Dean, with frequent member engagement informally, and then also this formal scrutiny structure, has been beneficial to the process. And I think my observation would be that as this is implemented, whichever decision government make, I think it would be probably in everyone's interests if we kept that up. You know, that informal structure, but also perhaps a few of these resources committee meetings at various appropriate moments throughout the process, I think would keep everyone going forwards well.
Right. So we've reached a point of conclusion then. So as a committee, are we happy to endorse the proposals to Cabinet and then on to Council for the proposed 4 unitary plus Isle of Wight solution for local government reorganisation in Hampshire, with a North Hampshire unitary? So we're all agreed. Okay. So I'd just like to say that I'm aware of the immense amount of work that's gone into this. It's been Herculean, and I'm sure that for certain offices it's been like the labours of Hercules. So I do wish to applaud and thank them for all the hard work that they've done alongside the day jobs. And I think that this council, in the process for Hampshire, with the other councils, has taken a lead role, and so it's good to see that Basingstoke has been in the vanguard of this change, this historic change in local government. So thank you for very much for doing that. I hope that we all feel that we've shone a light on these very complicated proposals, and I hope that you feel that we've, and I hope those who will be looking in on YouTube will think that we've done the scrutiny task justice. Thank you all very much for participating. I think we can release the leader and the senior officers, and all we need to do now, and we've still got time before 9:30, is to look at the work programme. I'm going to turn over with some exhaustion to Katie to take us through that.
So on the 25th of November, we've got the draft budget and the MTFS, and also the Q1 of the 25-26 KPIs, and also EDI overview. So a full agenda on that one.
Good. And as always, you're encouraged to come up with any further ideas that topics for us to consider. I have to say that unfortunately I will not be present at the council meeting on the 25th of September because I'm away on holiday. But my excuse is that, of course, this I'm not actually. I am actually having to fly back a few days afterwards for a funeral, unfortunately, but perhaps I should bring it forward. Anyway, thank you all very much for participating, I hope we all agree was a good session. And Councillor Carr, do you want to? You don't want to have the last word?
Just
I thought I had the last word.
Question. 25th of November, is all of that achievable? All three of those things? I'm just wondering, because obviously the budget will be quite considerable, the Q1 piece will be large. I'm just wondering, do we move the EDI piece to January? I'm just wondering whether it could all be delivered.
I think, thank you, I think that's a fair point. And it's we'll keep moving EDI out though. I'm sort of, is that the one that has to be moved out?
Yeah.
Right, okay. Well, I'll get there in the end on that.
The other way you could do it is to combine Q1 and Q2 for KPIs, review 2 quarters together. So if you want to do that.
What do we think? Okay.
Do it that way round,
Yeah.
so we'll merge
Yeah.
Q1 and Q2
Yeah.
and keep EDI on.
All right. Thank you.